All right. Well, welcome back, and I have a guest speaker. In fact, I have basically my whole fourth period class at back here. Say hi, fourth period. And they're all working on their stuff, but I do have a guest speaker from my fourth period class. You guys already heard him in the second video. Say hi, Landis.
Hello.
And we're going to get his 2 cents worth in this as well. But we are going to talk about the rise of the Roman Empire. First off, it's important to point out that not the entire time of Rome is it an empire. And we sometimes use the word empire when we should not. You should not be using the word Roman Empire before 44 BC or 28 BC, depending on your point of view. Between 44 BC and 28 BC, we'll let you have your little debate at that time period. But there is no Roman Empire before 44 BC. It is the Roman Republic. Okay? And then before the Roman Republic, it's archaic Rome, or simply Rome. However, we are going to be talking about, at the end, would we rather live during the Roman Republic or the Empire when we get there? We're going to take a look at the lasting characteristics of the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire on us today. Landis, can you just give me real quick, what do you think the difference between the Greek democracy and the Roman Republic?
Well, the Greeks believed much more in direct democracy, whereas the Romans sort of added a thin layer, well, not a thin layer, but a layer of bureaucracy to it by having the wealthy aristocrats have their own little senate.
All right, that's a part of it. Simply put, Greek democracy was a direct democracy, and the Greek citizens literally voted on everything. The laws were made, they would vote on literally every law. A republic is a representative democracy. So in other words, you're going to vote for your rulers. And as Landis went, the Romans went a step farther, and they had a separation between the patricians and the plebeians. So the plebes, they had their own little...
Yeah, they have their own little pleb council where they can just sort of think that they're doing something, but really they're just sitting there and not really doing anything, whereas the Senate really has all the power.
That's right. And at the Senate, you would have the patricians. These are your landed owning lords. This is passed down from generation to generation. And so your elite get more representation than your common everyday person. And that's going to lead to a problem that's going to cause Rome to lose its republican ideal.
Eventually, later on, corruption in the Senate may cause some even bigger problems for Rome.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get into that. So just be aware that that's coming. All right, so if we look at this, and Landis, this is where I need your help. That dark color around Rome, what color is that?
That's like a sort of orangish color, I'd say.
We'll call it orangish. Rome before the Punic Wars, that's basically all it was. They will gain territory to their north, and during the First Punic War. We're not going to get into all that, but simply put, Rome is on the Apennine Peninsula. That's Rome. That's it. But after the Punic Wars, that all changes, and they're going to gain territory around the world. By the end of the Third Punic War and the expansionist wars of the 2nd century BC, they're going to gain control of Macedonia and Greece and North Africa, Spain, and begin conquering even into Gaul by the 1st century BC. And they're going to have basically colonies all over, but it's part of their country as well. But as they get more land and they dominate the Mediterranean Sea region, there's also something else that's going to happen. Rome's professional army can't be paid for by simple tax collecting. Or They chose not to. Instead, they choose to go by the spoils of war system, which is every time a general wins, they get to collect all the money from it. They got to send a little bit back to Rome, and they would pay their soldiers out of what they got. And so the new wealth of expansion brought some serious problems. First off, the new lands brought more food into the empire. So how do farmers make their money?
By selling their crops.
That's right.
Also, another thing I want to bring up is I think it's important to mention how really Carthage served as a roadblock to Rome, and they weren't able to expand until Rome defeated them. And Rome wanted to make sure that Carthage never came back. So when they took over Carthage, they literally salted the earth there to make sure nothing ever grew back.
Yes, they did. And I talked about that in my last video, how Rome had this vengeance during the Third Punic
Yeah, because
War.
they really didn't like the Carthaginians.
No, they didn't. In fact, we get the word puny from the Punic kingdom or Carthage.
Yeah, to give you an idea of how much they really just hated their guts.
They despised them. We get that from Latin. But as they gained territory and people, when they conquered areas, especially like Carthage as an example, they would bring in slaves. Now slaves have two things. They have no rights and they can make no money. And since they are not being paid for their labor, somebody who is trying to work at the lower middle class, their jobs are now taken away. Farmers who were trying to earn income are now competing against large latifundia plantations that have slave labor and can make massive amounts of crops compared to the quote-unquote noble farmer that the Republic of Rome looked idealized. Like Cincinnatus, you may remember the story of Cincinnatus. What did he do when he was done? After he was dictator, he went back and he was a noble farmer, right? Well, the noble farmer can't make it anymore, simply put. And the latifundia would give loans to these small farmers. Of course, what happens when you can't pay?
You get put in slavery.
They get put in slavery.
And
Slavery
this is
was
also where we started to see the transition of Rome into like a full-blown slave state, where it has more slaves than actual
Right.
citizens.
and
This is sort of a turning point in Rome.
And something I said in my last video, slavery and democracy, they don't coexist. They will for a while, but eventually slavery erodes the root of democratic ideals, because at its very nature, you're saying some people are haves and some people are have-nots. And Rome never really got rid of that mindset. They just simply put beneath the patrician slaves, and then the slave class began eroding the patrician class, and the plebeians were gaining more wealth. They thought this was good. However, it was also eventually going to erode their power, because the only way out of the slave class
Is to revolt or
Is to
buy
re-
yourself out.
or buy yourself out. Well, the only way
Because,
you can make money.
Sort of different from American slavery. In Roman slavery, you could actually, if you, your master could let you earn some money, and if you worked for them for long enough, they might let you go.
Now, in American slavery, technically that could happen.
It just like almost never happened.
It almost never happened, but it did. I mean, we had our Nat Turners, not Nat Turner. That's not the one I'm thinking of. Frederick Douglass is who I meant to say. We have our Frederick Douglass type stories and those kind of things, but that was very rare. What ended up happening is the only way to buy your way out was to join the military, because that was the only way to make money, because the military, though it was professional, was also what we call extra legal. Extra legal is outside the legal process. So Rome's Senate really wasn't paying for the army. Instead, the army was paying for itself by taking the spoils of war. And one thing that this requires is you always have to get more territory. And the other thing it requires is the general. The general has to make the right decisions on whether he's going to send money back to Rome or not. Eventually, they're not really going to.
And because the military was expanding so quickly, it was becoming even more and more powerful. And if any of you know politics, you know that when the military becomes more powerful than the actual government, and you have a very strong military leader, that usually leads to some problems. That one problem in particular being called a coup.
Yes, and of course Julius Caesar would lead a coup by crossing the Rubicon River, which I talked about in my last video, and eventually march into Rome. And when he arrives in Rome, the people didn't feel like they were being oppressed, at least most of them. They cheered as he marched down the
Yeah,
streets
they
of
felt
Rome.
like they were being liberated because
That's
the
right.
Senate had just gotten so bad
Corrupt
by then
and bad, yeah.
that they felt like they were being oppressed by the Senate. So they thought, oh, look, an emperor. This is amazing.
Yeah, and frankly,
Although-
they were being oppressed by the Senate. Now, let's say it the way it was. You know, a lot of the people who were living in Rome, living off what they called the dole, which they weren't getting very much of, they were in Rome trying to find work because a lot of them had lost their land due to the policies of the latifundia, which were the people in the Senate. So,
Although, interestingly enough, the Romans themselves actually hated the term emperor, and so they would never call their leaders emperor because they thought it was a sort of autocratic term and was very unpleasant, and they didn't like to think of themselves that way as, you know, autocratic brutes with
That's
like a
right.
king. So they still thought of themselves as a republic, even though they were pretty much an absolute monarchy by this point.
yeah, and by that time, they would eventually, leaders or emperors would call themselves Caesars to avoid that because they weren't emperors like those Persians. No.
Yeah,
no.
rough. We
No,
would
no,
never
no,
be
no.
like the Persians.
No,
Fear
no.
not, dear
No,
Romans.
no. We're Caesars, you know, and Caesar became a god eventually, you know. And that's another story.
Yeah, like son of Mars and whatnot.
Yeah. So, anyway, Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC on the Ides of March. We talked about that in the last video. And the Roman Senate thinks, hooray, we get rid of emperors and Caesars, but
It kind of backfired.
It backfired because the people didn't side with the Senate.
Because they really liked Caesar and thought, man, this guy, he helped us out a lot. You know, he was fighting against corruption.
Yeah, so they kind of liked him. And so instead, what you had was the second triumvirate. Now, I talked about the first triumvirate in the last video, but the second triumvirate, yeah, you're going to have three leaders come to power, and, you know, you have Lepidus down in North Africa, and we're not going to talk about him much because he doesn't stick around much. Eventually, what ends up happening is you're going to have a civil war between Octavian and Mark Antony, and long story short, because I'm going to sum things up, you can read the story about Cleopatra and Mark Antony and all that in your book. What I really want to focus in on is what happens after the defeat of Mark Antony in the Battle of the Nile in Egypt. And simply put, it's Octavian becomes the new emperor of Rome, and he takes on two new titles. First off, he calls himself Augustus. Of course, he was also a nephew of Caesar. And so he calls himself Augustus Caesar. And the term Caesar would be the name the Romans would choose to call their emperors.
And eventually, a lot of European kingdoms took the name Caesar and turned it into their name for king, like the Germans with Kaiser, or the Russians with Tsar.
Tsar,
which
yeah.
are both butcherizations of Caesar.
Yep, pretty much. Yep, because they didn't speak Latin. They spoke.
Yeah, because the Germans spoke their own Germanic language and the Slavs spoke their local Slavic languages.
Yes. So under Augustus, Rome would be ruled as an empire. From that moment, Rome is definitely an empire. Now, one of the little debates that people have is, did the Roman Empire begin with Julius Caesar, or did the Roman Empire actually begin with Augustus Caesar? That depends on your point of view. I happen to be in the Julius Caesar camp.
I am the same way. I think that he sort of came in and sort of started the entire thing.
Yeah, he started the process. Other people would say no, because still the Roman Senate was in control. or had authority until Augustus Caesar got declared the exalted one.
But the entire reason why the Senate assassinated Caesar is because they were afraid of him marching in and just slicing all their throats and having them completely removed.
Yes, so we're not going to split hairs here for this discussion. I'm going to let you, the listener, my students, make up your own mind on that. And you'll hear both sides of that argument as you get older. But what I want you to know is after Augustus, it is clear Rome is an empire. Imperialism and slavery throughout history always lead to empire. You look at what happened in Persia. It happened in Persia, or before the Persians, with the Neo-Babylonians and the Assyrians. Okay, but throughout history, imperialism plus slavery equals empire. And it happens over and over and over and over again. Now, we went over this. What was the difference between a republic and an empire? We talked about this earlier. I want you guys to pause the video. This should go in your notes, okay? However, I'm going to move on because we talked about this earlier. Simply put, Roman Republic, officials are elected. During the Roman Empire, the emperor would rule. How long would he rule? For life. Which is why, once the Roman Empire starts happening, leaders get assassinated a lot.
Yeah, and the sort of funny thing about Rome is like, literally, a leader would be assassinated, the next guy, somebody would say, hey, I'm the emperor now, and then somebody would stab him and go, hey guys, now I'm the emperor, and then somebody would stab him and declare himself emperor.
Yeah.
It was just a big, long, never-ending cycle where the Praetorians would betray the empire, and then the soldiers would betray the Praetorians, and then so on and so forth.
Yes, and especially after the Pax Romana. So the first half of the empire happened less.
And eventually this infighting is what sort of leads to Rome's decline and eventually its collapse.
Yep, and we'll talk about that in the next video, and he's absolutely correct.
Because obviously, constant coups and civil wars isn't really the best for the stability of your nation.
No. Now, there is an advantage of empire, and what the advantage is, if you have a good ruler, you can circumvent all the politics to slow things down. You don't have to listen to the bantering and arguments of the Senate. And a republic by its very nature is trying to divide power with checks and balances, and that's a good thing until you need to get something done quickly. And the Romans took care of that during the Republic era by having what they called noble dictators like Cincinnatus. But the problem is, during the Empire time, well, they didn't give up their power. They kept it for life. During the good emperor's rules, that's not proper grammar, but I'm going to go with it anyway. During their ruling times, Rome would expand, get wealthier, be better off. If you were a Roman citizen, things were pretty good. Okay? And then during the bad emperor time periods, you would have mentally disturbed people ruling, like Caligula, naming his horse to the Senate, and Nero, who would go, I'm going to burn down part of Rome, and then I'll blame all the Christians for it, and I'll play my fiddle and watch it burn, and then I'll once I have build my new little park where that little bad part of Rome was.
But I have a giant statue of myself in my park.
I'll have a giant statue of my park, but I need torches at night to see my statue, so I'll take Christians and I'll tar them and crucify them and then set them on fire at night so I can see my beautiful statue.
Yeah, that's how psychopathic he was. He went, human beings. This would make a great Bed Bath & Beyond scent.
Yeah, it's kind of disgusting, but yeah, it's kind of morbid. But the time period from the beginning of the Roman Empire till either 180 or 212 AD, and again, historians argue about what date to end the Pax Romana. I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. What I am going to say is this is a time that is known as the time of Roman peace.
Yeah, Pax Romana in Latin literally means Roman peace.
Yes, it's a time of great wealth. But the thing that you have to understand is it's really not peaceful. It's just peaceful inside the Roman Empire. Rome is fighting expansionist, imperialist wars across the borders of their empire.
It's sort of the same way with all the Paxes in world history, like the Pax Britannica or the Pax America, where even though it's still called the peace yada yada, there's still many wars going on. It's just it's peaceful for the people who get to enjoy it.
Right. The Pax Romana became a golden age during this time period, and during this Pax Romana time period, many accomplishments happened for the Roman people. One of them was the building of their roads. It is said that the Roman roads are still the best constructed roads ever built.
Yeah, because even though our American roads start crumbling like 2 years after they're built, Roman roads have literally lasted for thousands of years.
Yes, they have. And it was said that every road led to Rome, and that was partially true. They also built aqueducts. Now, a lot of people think the Romans invented aqueducts. The Persians did. I gotta say that, okay? But what the Romans did was that they perfected the aqueduct. And one of the things that allowed them to perfect the aqueduct, to bring water from the mountains to the city so that they have fresh drinking water for 1 million people, was the use of the arch. The architectural design of the arch allowed, Landis has to go, but...
Toodles.
Yes.
Doodles.
Yep. But long story short, the aqueducts brought water into the Roman Empire, into the major cities of Rome, and allowed also for clean sanitation then to be disposed of downstream.
Yeah, the
from these
Romans
major
pretty
cities.
much invented the modern sewage system and modern sanitation systems.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. They had flushable toilets, basically.
Definitely.
Yeah, pretty cool, huh? So they also, because of what they were able to accomplish with the arch, they were able to make these giant buildings all over the place in Rome. And Rome was a very decadent city built in Greek style. So when we start talking about how the Romans used Greek architectural traits and then perfected them and then modified them just a little bit, we combine Greek and Roman architecture into what we call Greco-Roman style. And so Greek and Roman architecture was seen throughout the city of Rome and the cities throughout the Roman Empire, like Alexandria. Even though Alexandria was built by the Greeks, it was also a major city of the Roman Empire as well. You would have the dome. So you can almost think of a dome like a three-dimensional arc. You know, an arch, if you built arches together, eventually you would have a dome, if you can conceptualize it that way. So we're going to learn more about the architectural styles of the Romans when Mr. Creasy talks to us later on. But Rome was able to build great buildings and temples. They were also able to build great arenas of entertainment. And the greatest arena of entertainment was the Colosseum. The Colosseum sat over 200,000 people. To give you something to compare it to, the largest stadium in the United States today is at the University of Michigan, and it seats about 110,000. The Colosseum of Rome seated 200,000. It was huge. And it was the entertainment center of ancient Rome. You would have gladiatorial events, you would have theater events. Often events were put on at a low or no cost at all. And this was done so that the ruling Caesar could show his power. At the top level, you would have the slaves. At the third level, you would have the plebeian class. At the second level, you would have patrician class, but they were poor patricians. And then your wealthy and powerful, like your Senate, they would sit at the bottom. And then in the box on the bottom would be the ruling Caesar. And in the Caesar, during a gladiatorial event, once a gladiator had put down another gladiator, they would then look to Caesar. And the Caesar would then give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And often the Caesar would parlay to the crowd. Should I go thumbs up? Thumbs up, thumbs down? No, a thumbs up. When he gave his final order, thumbs up, we're going to let the guy live, or thumbs down, we're going to watch him be killed. And Caesar always had the final word. And that was a message to the entire empire as well. Yes, everybody can say their things to Caesar, but Caesar gets the last word. Now, the Roman theater was very similar to Greek theater, but the Romans added this stage at the bottom of the amphitheater, and it was called the pulpitum. And if any of you go to church, where does the preacher preach from today? He preaches from the pulpit. We get the word pulpit from pulpitum in Latin, and in in Roman theater, the Pontimus would be the narrator. So if you ever watched a movie with a narrator, that would be the Pontimus. And then of course you would have the chorus, and the chorus would, emphasize certain things, and of course you would have your actors as well. Something to point out in Roman culture is the actors were always slaves. And this is why the Roman patrician class was especially appalled when Nero would also put on plays, because only slaves were actors. Your gladiators were slaves as well. Today, if you think about our sports stars and our Hollywood stars, they're wealthy. They tend to come from the wealthy class. In fact, wealthy people are often celebrities just for being rich, like the Kardashians, right? But back in the Roman time period, your actors and your sports heroes were actually slaves. They were at the poorest and lowest class. You would also have slaves as chariot race drivers. And chariot racing during the Roman Empire was a big event. It was the NASCAR of its day. And yes, just like NASCAR, a lot of people go to watch the races, not to see who wins, but to watch the wrecks. And so the Roman circus, and yes, I said circus, was basically you'd have this long, narrow track with very tight corners. And the corners basically were, you had to go around a pole on each end of the stadium. And going around that pole, what's the chariot do when the horses are going full bore? Well, the chariots, they're going to slide out to the right. If you're going clockwise anyway, they're going to slide out, right? And of course, what happens when the chariots slide out and they're right next to each other? Well, sometimes they bang into each other, and that leads to wrecks, right? And often these chariot races, you would have people die racing. But to the winner went riches for the owner of that chariot, which, by the way, was usually not the chariot driver. The chariot driver was usually a slave. The largest of these, called the Circus Maximus, get it, it's big, right? Sat 300,000 people. a lot of your racetracks today, like Bristol and Daytona, they seat about the same number of people. But the Romans were doing this 200,000 years, I mean not 200,000, 2,000 years ago. All right, so simply put, Rome, from its beginnings, expanded from a city under archaic kings to a republic. And then from a republic, it eventually became an empire. And what caused it to lose its republican ideals or its democratic ideals was slavery and imperialism. Imperialism is the making of colonies. The era of Roman Republic introduced the concept of representative democracy, but slavery and imperialism ended that. The beginning of the Roman Empire period was a time of great wealth and innovation, where Hellenistic culture spread across not only where it was before in the east under the Macedonians, but now it spread west across the entire Mediterranean arc, including up into Europe and North Africa. So, I'm now going to ask my fifth period class, who is in here today. How many of you know about the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic enough to be able to answer a simple question? Would you rather live during the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire? Now, if you don't know enough, don't answer. But if you know, by a show of hands, how many of you would rather live during the Roman Republic era, where there were more rights for the common man, but frankly, they were a lot poorer? Raise your hand. How many of you would rather live during the Roman Empire era, where if you were at the top, you were very wealthy, but Rome was ruled by a dictatorial leader? Okay, so I want a couple of you who would choose the Roman Empire period to come if you want to be in the video. Who wants to be in the video? Anybody? All right, come up here. Yes, I'm going to have students in this video. All right, who's in this video now? Earlier we had Landis Scott. Who we got now?
David Monroe, the best student.
Landis would say he's the best, but I'll let you guys figure that out on your own. David, give me 3 reasons why you'd rather live in the Empire than the Republic.
Well, because like you're not like poor and stuff, but like before you had a lot more rights, like you could do stuff, but you really couldn't do like that much stuff because your empire didn't have anything. But like now you can like have like a good job and like get stuff that you want.
But all the jobs went to slaves.
Yeah, but so then like everything's easier. Like you have food and stuff. You don't have to like go out for months and months hunting for food. You don't have to like worry about that stuff of like not having like a roof and stuff.
Wow. All right. Anybody else choose Empire that wants to be in the video? Okay. Who would rather live during the Roman Republic period when, you had the foundings of a democracy and democratic ideals? You would rather live during the Republic era. All right. Come on up here. All right, so you're going to be in the video also. You'd rather live during the Republic.
Yes.
Tell everybody who you are.
I'm Trip Williams.
Trip Williams. All right, Trip, why would you rather live during the Republic time period?
Because you don't have to choose a dictator. You can choose someone that actually knows how to run the Republic and someone that can feed everyone or choose smart decisions, and not someone who is a dictator and will basically choose himself over anyone else.
All right. And you know what? This little debate that we have going on, we still have this debate up until today. There are definite advantages of living in a democratic republic like we do here in the United States. We have the right to vote, choose our leaders. We have freedom to do with our wealth what we want, but we also have less safety nets. And the question of, do we want more government and stronger government, or do we want less government and more power to the individual? That question goes on even today. And I will simply leave it there as we end up. What do you think, as you've listened to these videos for the past few days, what do you think is best? And why? And that's it. That's important, because your generation, you're the next generation. You're going to determine which direction our country goes. All right, this is Mr. Sprague signing off. And my fifth period class, say goodbye.
Good